Jesus Talmita, and I am going to present 3 scientific names of parasite. So the first scientific name of parasite is Enterobius vermicularis. It is widely known as the human pinworm due to the female's long pointed tail. So what is a pinworm? A pinworm is a small, thin, white round worm called Enterovermicularis that sometimes lives in the colon and rectum of humans. Pinworms are about the length of staple. While an infected person sleeps, female pinworms leave the intestine through the anus and deposit their eggs on the surrounding skin. So next is the life cycle of Enterobius vermicularis. Gravid adult female Enterobius vermicularis eggs on the perineal folds image. Infection occurs via self-inoculation or the transferring eggs to the mouth with the hands that have scratched the perineal area, or through exposure to eggs in the environment, for example, contaminated surfaces, clothes, and bed linens. Following ingestion of infective eggs, the larvae hatch in the small intestine and the adult establish themselves in the colon, usually in the cecum image. The time interval from ingestion of infective eggs to the oviposition by the adult females is about 1 month. At full maturity, adult females measure 8 to 13 mm and adult males 2 to 5 mm. The adult lifespan is about 2 months. Gravid females migrate nocturnally outside the anus and oviposit while crawling on the skin of the perineal area. The larvae contained inside the eggs develop the eggs become infected in 4 to 6 hours under optimal conditions image. Rarely, eggs may become airborne and be inhaled and swallowed. Retroinfection or the migration of newly hatched larvae from the anal skin back into the rectum may occur in the frequency with which happen is unknown. When it comes to the host, oxyrod nematodes or pinworms generally exhibit high host specificity. Humans are considered the only host of Enterobius vermicularis, although occasional infections have been reported in captive chimpanzees. Next is who is at risk of pinworm infection. Pinworm infection occurs worldwide and affects persons of all ages and socio-economic levels. It is the most common worm infection in the United States. Pinworm infection occurs most commonly among school-age and preschool-age children, institutionalized persons, and household members and caretakers of persons with pinworm infection. Pinworm infection often occurs in more than one person in household and institutional settings. Child care centers often are the site of cases of pinworm infection. So for the mode of transmission, a person is infected with pinworms by ingesting pinworm eggs, either directly or indirectly. These eggs are deposited around the anus by the worm and can be carried to common surfaces such as hands, thighs, beddings, clothing, and toilet seats. By putting anyone's contaminated hands, including one's own, around the mouth area or putting one's mouth on the common contaminated surfaces, a person can ingest pinworm eggs and become infected with the pinworm parasite. So for the diagnosis, a person infected with pinworm is often asymptomatic, but itching around the anus is a common symptom. Diagnosis of pinworm can be reached from the 3 simple techniques. The first option is to look for the worms in the perineal region 2 to 3 hours after the infected person is asleep. The second option is to touch the perineal skin with a transparent tape to collect possible pinworm eggs around the anus first thing in the morning. If a person is infected, the eggs on the tape will be visible under a microscope. The tape method should be conducted on the 3 consecutive mornings right after the infected person wakes up and before he or she does any washing. Since anal itching is a common symptom of pinworm, the third option for diagnosis is analyzing samples from under fingernails under a microscope. An infected person who has scratched the anal area may have picked up some pinworm eggs under the nails that could be used for diagnosis. Now let's move on to the symptoms. About 1/3 of all infections are completely asymptomatic. If symptoms do arise, commonly perineal pruritus occurs. So So for the treatment, the medication used for the treatment of pinworm are either mebendazole, pyrantel-pamo, and albendazole. Any of these drugs are given in one dose initially, and then another single dose of the same drugs 2 weeks later. Pyrantel-pamo is available without prescription. The medication does reliably kill pinworm egg. Therefore, the second dose is to prevent reinfection by adult worms that hatch from any eggs not killed by the first treatment. Health practitioners and parents should weigh the health risks and benefits of these drugs for patients under 2 years of age. So for the prevention and control, washing your hands with soap and warm water after using the toilet, changing diapers, and before handling food is the most successful way to prevent pinworm infection. In order to stop the spread of pinworm and possible reinfection, people who are infected should shower morning to help remove a large amount of the eggs on the skin. Showering is a better method than taking a bath because showering avoids potentially contaminating the bath water with pinworm eggs. Infected people should not co-bath with others during their time of infection. So the second scientific name of parasite is Fasciola hepatica. It is commonly known as liver fluke or the sheep liver fluke, and Fasciola gigantica are large liver flukes which are primarily found in domestic and wild ruminants, but also are causal agents of fasciolopsis in humans. Although Fasciola hepatica and Fasciola gigantica are distinct species, intermediate forms that are thought to represent hybrids of the two species have been found in parts of Asia and Africa, where both species are endemic. These forms usually have intermediate morphologic characteristics. For example, overall size and proportions, possess genetic elements from both species, exhibit unusual bloodity levels. When it comes to the life cycle of Fasciola hepatica, immature eggs are discharged in the biliary ducts and pass into the stool. Eggs become embryonated in fresh water over 2 weeks. Embryonated eggs release miracilia, which invade a suitable snail intermediate host. In the snail, the parasite undergoes several development stages: sporosis, ridae, and cercaria. The cercaria is released from the snail and insists as metacercaria on aquatic vegetation or other. Humans and other mammals become infected by ingesting metacercaria contaminated vegetation or the watercress. After ingestion, the metacercaria exceeds the duodenum and penetrate through the intestinal wall into the peritoneal cavity. When it comes to the host, Fasciola hepatica and Fasciola gigantica are primarily parasites of domestics and wild ruminants, such as sheep, cattle, and goats. Also camelids, cervids, and buffalo. Infections occasionally occur in aberrant, non-ruminant herbivore hosts, including equids, lagomorphs, macropods, and rodents. Detection of Fasciola SPP eggs in the feces of carnivores probably represents spurious passage following consumption of contaminated liver. For the distribution, Fasciola hepatica is found on all inhabited continents in more than 70 countries, particularly where sheep or cattle are arise. Human infections have been reported in parts of Europe, the Middle East, Latin America, the Caribbean, Asia, Africa, and rarely in Australia. Although the conditions of Fasciola hepatica life cycle exist in some parts of the United States, most of the reported U.S. cases of Fasciola hepatica infection in humans have occurred in immigrants who became infected in other countries. Fasciola gigantica, it is mainly found in tropical and subtropical regions. Human cases have been reported in parts of Asia and Africa, as well as in Hawaii and Iran. So for the mode of transmission, there is no vector in Fasciola hepatica transmission. Transmission occurs through the ingestion of raw, freshwater vegetation on which the flukes in their metacercaria form are insistent. So for the pathogenesis, Fasciola hepatica is acquired by eating vegetation on which metacercaria are attached. Upon ingestion, the metacersaria are released, penetrate the gut wall, traverse the peritoneal cavity, pass through the liver capsule into the liver parenchyma, and enter the bile duct. When it comes to the diagnosis, the infection typically is diagnosed by examining stool called fecal specimens under a microscope. The diagnosis is confirmed if Fasciola eggs are seen. More than one specimen may need to be examined to find the parasite. Certain types of blood tests also may be helpful for diagnosing Fasciola infection. When it comes to symptoms, in acute, it is more common in sheep, and it has 10,000 metacersaria consumed at one time, and it has dramatic liver inflammation. When it comes to chronic, it is more common and rarely fatal, and it has non-specific symptoms. And lastly, the Halzon, eating raw infected liver, and it can infect our pharynx, and it causes swelling and obstructs breathing. For prevention, individual people can protect themselves by not eating raw watercress and other water plants, especially from Fasciola endemic graze areas. As always, travelers to areas with poor sanitation should avoid food and water that might be contaminated. So the third scientific name is Fasciolopsis buski. Fasciolopsis is a genus of trematodes. They are also known as the intestinal flukes. Only one species is recognized, Fasciolopsis buski. It is notable parasite of medical importance in humans and veterinary importance in pigs. It is prevalent in southern and eastern Asia. When it comes to the life cycle, immature eggs are discharged into the intestine and stool. In number 1, eggs become embryonated in water. In number 2, eggs release metacidia. In number 3, which invade a suitable snail intermediate host. In number 4, the snail and the parasite undergo several developmental stages. The cersaria are released from the snail in number 5 and insist as metacersaria on aquatic plants in number 6. The mammalian host become infected by ingesting metacersaria on the aquatic plants. After ingestion, the metacersaria exist in the duodenum. In number 7 and attached to the intestinal wall, they are developed into adult flukes with the size of 20 to 75 mm by 8 to 20 mm. In approximately 3 months attached to the intestinal wall of the mammalian host or the humans and pigs. In number 8, the adults have a lifespan of about 1 year. When it comes to the distribution, Fasciolopsis buski is the only species included in the genus Fasciolopsis. It is a trematode parasite commonly known as the giant Asian intestinal fluke. Due to its large size, its geographical distribution restricted to Asia, and its location within the host body confined to the intestine. Mode of transmission, Fasciolopsis buski is not transmitted directly from humans to humans. Humans and pigs pass eggs in their feces, which develop in water and infect snails as intermediate hosts. After further development, the parasites leave the snail intermediate host and insist on water plants. In pathogenesis, Fasciolopsis, infection of humans and swine by the trematode Fasciolopsis buski, a parasitic worm. The adult worm 2 to 7.5 cm or 0.8 to 3 inches long attach themselves to the tissues of the small intestine of the host by means of ventral suckers. The sites of attachment may later ulcerate and form abscesses. In diagnosis, most infections are light and asymptomatic, but heavy infections may cause diarrhea, abdominal pain, fever, and signs of malabsorption or intestinal obstruction. Diagnosis of Fasciolopsis is made by finding eggs or less commonly adult worms in the feces. When it comes to symptoms, Fasciolopsis buski, the largest intestinal fluke infecting humans, can produce an intestinal disorder characterized by diarrhea, abdominal pain, fever, ascites, and intestinal obstruction. Most infections, however, are asymptomatic. When it comes to treatment, is there a treatment for Fasciolopsis? Yes, Fasciolopsis can be treated with prescription medicine taken by mouth, called Parisiquantel. Praziquantel is approved by FDA, but considered investigational for this purpose. Prevention. How can Fasciolopsis be prevented? Cook all aquatic plants well before eating them in boiling water. In endemic areas, prevent fecal contamination from humans or pigs of water where aquatic plants are grown. Do not feed raw aquatic plants to pigs. So when it comes to summary, Enterobius vermicularis or pinworm produces an enterobius that is frequently asymptomatic. The most typical symptom is perennial pruritus, especially at night. When the worms migrate and become more active, other symptoms include anorexia, irritability, and abdominal pain. Enterobius vermicularis come from an organism that primarily lives in the ileum and cecum. Once Enterobius vermicularis eggs are ingested, they take about 1 to 2 months to develop into adult worms, which happens in the small intestine. So how common is Enterobius vermicularis is? Enterobius vermicularis or pinworms is one of the most common human parasitic helminths, and by one estimation about 200 million people worldwide and supposedly infected, with children aged 5 to 10 years old accounting over 30% of cases. Fasciola hepatica has an indirect life cycle. Many mammals including sheep, cattle, rodents, marsupials, and humans can act as definite hosts. Adult liver flukes, which are about 10 mm wide and 25 mm long, live in the bile duct, feeding on blood and bile and epithelial cells. So, what are the features of Fasciola hepatica? So, the adult worm is averaging 30 mm in length and 30 mm in width. Fasciola hepatica is one of the largest flukes in the world. The adult worm has a very characteristic leaf shape, with the anterior end being broader than the posterior end, and an anterior cone-shaped projection. So, Fasciola hepatica is found on all inhabited continents in more than 70 countries, particularly where sheep or cattle are raised. Human infections have been reported in parts of Europe, the Middle East, Latin America, the Caribbean, Asia, Africa, and rarely in Australia. So, next is Fasciolopsis buski. It is the largest intestinal fluke infecting humans, and it can produce an intestinal disorder characterized by diarrhea, abdominal pain, fever, ascites, and intestinal obstruction. Human hosts become infected by ingesting Metathesauria on the aquatic plants. So, Fasciolopsis buski is a large disoverental flattened fluke characterized by a blunt anterior end, undulating unbranched sessa, tandem dendritic testes, branch ovaries, and ventral suckles to attach itself to the host. So, what disease is caused by Fasciolopsis buski? Fasciolopsis is an infection with the intestinal fluke Fasciolopsis buski, which is acquired by eating aquatic plants. Flukes are more parasitic flatworms that infect various parts of the body. It includes blood vessels, gastrointestinal tract, lungs, and liver, depending on the species. And that brings us to the end. Thank you so much for your interest and attention. Again, I am Teresa de Jesus Almeida, your presenter of the day.